The riverboat captain rescued a frozen bride. Her veil held the charter to 5 states. Ice cracked against the hull as the Maybelle cut through the frozen river. Captain Eli Thorne stood at the wheel, his knuckles white against the polished wood. The last light of day caught something in his hand, a bridal veil, delicate as gossamer, stiff with frost. He turned it over carefully, watching how the fading sunlight played through the intricate lace patterns, casting spiderweb shadows across his weathered face. The Mississippi stretched before him like a road paved in broken glass. Behind him lay Riverton, ahead only wilderness and the promise of snow. Eli tucked the veil inside his coat, close to his heart, and squinted into the gathering darkness. Something about the weight of that fabric against his chest felt like judgment. "We'll make the northern bend by morning," he said to no one. His breath clouded the air, and the riverboat's engine thumped beneath his feet like a heartbeat. Riverton in 1847 was a town with one foot in the wilderness and the other reaching desperately for civilization. Wooden buildings lined muddy streets that sloped down to the riverfront where Eli's Maybelle was the finest vessel to grace those waters. The morning fog rolled off the river and wound through the streets like a living thing, curling around the ankles of merchants opening their shops and dockworkers hauling cargo. Eli walked the town with the measured pace of a man who knew his place in it. At 43, the river had carved lines into his face that matched the bends and tributaries he'd navigated for 20 years. His dark hair had begun to silver at the temples, and beneath his captain's coat, his shoulders carried the invisible weight of solitude. "Morning, Captain," called Mrs. Whitley from her bakery doorway. She held out a fresh roll. "On the house." Eli nodded his thanks, taking the offering. The townsfolk treated him with a curious mix of respect and distance. They whispered about the woman he'd loved and lost a decade ago, Caroline, who'd chosen another man and another life far from the river. "Heard you're heading upriver again tomorrow," said Jeremiah, the blacksmith, as Eli passed his shop. "Bit late in the season, ain't it? I shall be thick past Mason's Creek." "Got business," Eli replied, the words clipped short. His business was survival. The Maybelle was all he had, and winter cargo meant eating through the months when the river froze solid. He returned to his modest home at the edge of town, a single-story cabin with a porch facing the water. Inside was sparse but neat: a bed, a table, shelves lined with books about rivers and maps, and a single charcoal sketch of Caroline that he couldn't bring himself to burn. The knock came as darkness fell. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet house. Eli opened the door to find a boy, no more than 12, clutching an envelope sealed with red wax. "From Mr. Hargrove, sir," the boy said, thrusting the letter forward. "He says it's urgent." Eli broke the seal, an ornate H pressed into the wax, and unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, the ink blotched in places as if written in haste. "Captain Thorne, I write with the most desperate appeal. My daughter Clara's carriage has been lost in the snowstorm north of Mason's Creek. She was traveling to her wedding at Oak Ridge when the storm hit 3 days ago. The search parties have found nothing. You know the river better than any man alive. I implore you, find her. The enclosed payment should suffice, but there will be more upon her safe return. There is more at stake than you know. The veil she carries contains within its fabric the charter for the territories, 5 states' worth of boundaries and rights. Without it, everything we've built stands to be lost. Please, Captain, you are our last hope. William Hargrove." Eli stared at the letter, then at the bank draft that had fallen from it. More money than he'd seen in 3 seasons of river trade. Hargrove was Riverton's wealthiest citizen, a man who'd built his fortune on land speculation and political connections. His daughter Clara was said to be as beautiful as she was educated, returning from schooling back east to marry the son of a territorial governor. But it was the mention of the veil that made Eli's blood run cold. A charter hidden in a bridal veil, the kind of secret that men would kill for in these uncertain times. He folded the letter and placed it on the table. Outside his window, the river flowed black and silent, carrying its own secrets to the sea. By dawn, the Maybelle's boilers were hot, steam billowing into the cold air. Eli stood at the wheel, watching his small crew make final preparations. They were good men: Jonas, the engineer with hands permanently blackened by coal; Micah, the young deckhand learning the river; and old Tom, who'd been navigating these waters since before Eli was born. "Mason's Creek is nearly 4 days upriver, Captain," old Tom said, joining Eli at the wheel. "And that's if the ice lets us through." "We'll make it," Eli replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "This about Hargrove's daughter?" When Eli didn't answer, Tom continued. "Folks are saying she was carrying something valuable. Papers of some kind." "We're just looking for a lost bride," Eli said firmly. "Nothing more." The Maybelle pulled away from the dock, her paddles churning the dark water. Riverton receded behind them, and soon they were surrounded by wilderness, bare trees lining the banks, hills rising in the distance, everything dusted with early snow. As they pushed northward, the river narrowed and the ice thickened. Twice they had to stop while Micah and Tom broke up ice floes that threatened to trap them. The air grew colder with each passing mile, and at night, huddled around the small stove in the pilot house, the men shared stories to keep the silence at bay. "My sister got married last spring," Micah said on the third night, his young face illuminated by the stove's glow. "Had a veil just like they say Hargrove's daughter was wearing. All lace and tiny pearls. Cost more than our pomade in a month." "Seems a strange place to hide a charter," Jonas mused, cleaning grease from his fingernails. "Why not a safe or a strongbox?" "Because men look in safes and strongboxes," old Tom replied. "No one thinks to examine a bride's veil." Eli remained silent, watching the darkness beyond the windows. He was thinking of Caroline, of the wedding they'd never had, of promises made and broken like river ice in spring. They passed settlements growing smaller and farther between, trading posts, a missionary station, a logging camp shut down for winter. The people they encountered spoke of the storm that had swept through days earlier, burying the roads in snow 3 feet deep. At a small trading post near Bear Creek, a trapper told them he'd seen a carriage abandoned several miles north. "No horses, no people," the man said, warming his hands over their stove. "Just an empty carriage half buried in snow. Looked expensive, all polished wood and brass fittings." Eli felt a tightening in his chest. "How far?" 2 hours on foot from here, following the old trail. "Can't miss it. Only rode through those hills." They moored the Maybelle at the trading post dock and prepared to set out on foot. Eli left Jonas to watch the boat while he, Tom, and Micah packed supplies, lanterns, ropes, blankets, and food. "If we find her alive, it'll be a miracle," Tom muttered as they trudged through the snow. 3 days in this cold. "We're not looking for miracles," Eli replied. "Just doing a job." The trail wound through dense forest, climbing steadily away from the river. Their breath clouded around them, and the snow crunched beneath their boots. Micah stumbled twice in snowdrifts that reached his knees. They found the carriage exactly where the trapper had described, a fine conveyance tipped onto its side, half buried in snow. The door hung open, and inside, trunks and boxes were scattered as if someone had searched through them in haste. "Looks like they unhitched the horses," Tom observed, examining the traces. "Probably tried to ride them out." Eli circled the carriage, studying the snow around it. "Tracks lead that way," he said, pointing west. 2 sets, one larger, probably the driver. One smaller. "The bride," Micah said quietly. They followed the tracks, which grew increasingly erratic, as if the travelers had struggled through deepening snow. After a mile, the larger set of footprints disappeared, replaced by a long furrow in the snow as if something heavy had been dragged. "Driver might have fallen, and she tried to drag him," Tom suggested. Another half-mile and they found the driver, a middle-aged man frozen solid against the trunk of a pine tree, his eyes closed as if in sleep. There was no blood, no sign of violence. Just a man who'd sat down to rest and never gotten up again. Micah crossed himself. "Should we bury him?" "Ground's too frozen," Eli said. "We'll mark the spot and send someone back." He was already looking ahead, following the single set of tracks that continued westward. They were growing fainter, partially filled by wind-blown snow. The tracks led them to the edge of a frozen pond, then seemed to vanish. Eli held up his hand, signaling the others to stop. He scanned the wide expanse, squinting against the glare of late afternoon sun on snow. That's when he saw her, a dark shape against the white, near the center of the pond. A human figure, kneeling as if in prayer. "There," he said, pointing. They approached cautiously, testing the ice with each step. As they drew closer, the figure resolved into a young woman in a dark traveling dress, her back to them. She was perfectly still, her head bowed. "Miss Hargrove," Micah called. "Clara Hargrove?" No response. Eli moved forward alone, the ice creaking beneath his weight. When he reached her, he understood why she hadn't answered. Clara Hargrove knelt frozen in place, her hands clasped before her as if in supplication. Ice crystals dusted her dark hair and eyelashes. Her skin was the pale blue of deep winter sky. But it was her expression that stopped Eli's breath, not fear or pain, but a strange serenity, as if she'd made peace with her fate in those final moments. Around her shoulders, caught by the wind and spread out across the ice like wings, was the veil, delicate lace crystallized by frost, shimmering in the fading light. Eli knelt beside her. "I'm sorry we didn't find you in time," he whispered. With gentle hands, he reached for the veil, carefully freeing it from where it had frozen to her dress. As he lifted it, he noticed something unusual: tiny, precise writing embroidered into the lace pattern. Words and numbers, boundaries and agreements, hidden in plain sight within the delicate design. The charter. Just as Hargrove had said. Eli folded the veil carefully and tucked it inside his coat. Then he turned to the others. "We need to get her back to the boat before dark." They wrapped Clara's body in blankets and carried her back through the forest as night fell. No one spoke. Even Micah, usually full of chatter, remained silent under the weight of their burden. Back on the Maybelle, they laid Clara in an empty cargo hold, covering her with more blankets though she was far beyond feeling cold. Eli stood over her for a long moment, studying her face. She couldn't have been more than 20, someone's daughter, someone's bride, someone's future, now nothing but a memory frozen in time. Later, alone in his cabin, Eli spread the veil across his small table. In the lamplight, he could see it clearly now. Woven into the lace pattern were words, dates, signatures. A complete charter defining the boundaries of 5 territories soon to become states, the water rights to the Mississippi and its tributaries, mining claims, and timber rights. A document that would shape the future of thousands. "Why hide it in a veil?" he murmured. "Because women are invisible," came a voice from the doorway. Eli looked up to find old Tom watching him, his weathered face solemn in the lamplight. "Men fight over papers in offices," Tom continued, stepping into the cabin. "They never think to look at what's right in front of them, the things women carry." Eli carefully folded the veil again. Hargrove's letter said everything they built stands to be lost without this. "And who's they, I wonder?" Tom asked. "Not folks like us, that's certain." That night, as the Maybelle made its slow way back down river, Eli couldn't sleep. He stood on deck, watching his breath cloud in the frigid air, feeling the weight of the veil inside his coat. With it, Hargrove and his associates would control the future of the river. Who could use it? Who could settle beside it? Who would profit from its bounty? Men like Eli would become little more than servants to their interests. But the alternative was theft, taking what wasn't his, betraying a grieving father's trust. By morning, ice had closed in around the Maybelle, trapping her in place. The men worked for hours with poles and axes, breaking up the floes enough to continue their journey. Progress was painfully slow. "We won't make Riverton for at least 5 days at this rate," Jonas reported, his face grim. "And the ice is getting worse. 5 days with a dead bride in the hold. 5 days to decide what to do with the secret hidden in her veil." That evening, they moored near a small settlement, little more than a church, a general store, and a handful of cabins. Eli went ashore alone, seeking out the minister, a young man with earnest eyes and ink-stained fingers. "We found a woman frozen in the snow," Eli explained. "Clara Hargrove. She was traveling to her wedding." The minister nodded sadly. "I've heard of the Hargroves. Powerful family downriver. Would you like me to say words over her?" "Yes," Eli said. "And I need to send a message to her father." They buried Clara the next morning in the small cemetery behind the church. The ground was frozen solid, and it took 6 men from the settlement working in shifts to dig a grave deep enough. The minister read from his Bible while Eli and his crew stood bareheaded in the cold. "She was carrying this," Eli said afterward, showing the minister the veil. "It belongs with her father, but I can't leave the river now. The ice is closing in. I'll see it reaches him," the minister promised. Eli hesitated, then handed over the veil, folded carefully in a clean cloth. Tell him his daughter died with dignity. That she was at peace." The minister studied Eli's face. "You haven't looked inside it, have you?" "The veil." Eli met his gaze steadily. "No," he lied. "It wasn't my place." Back on the Maybelle, old Tom was waiting on deck. "You gave it to the preacher," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I did. Hargrove will have your hide." Eli turned to look at the small cemetery on the hill, barely visible through the falling snow. "Some things matter more than money or power, Tom." They continued downriver, fighting the ice every mile of the way. 2 days later, they encountered another riverboat heading upstream, the Magnolia, captained by Eli's old rival, James Blackwood. The boats pulled alongside each other, and Blackwood hailed them from his pilot house. "Thorne, you're a hard man to find. What do you want, Blackwood?" Eli called back. "Got a message for you from William Hargrove. Says his daughter's been found, alive. Turns out she never left Riverton. The whole thing was some kind of misunderstanding." Eli felt as if the deck had dropped away beneath his feet. "What?" "That's the message." Oh, and he says forget about whatever business he hired you for. It's been handled. As the Magnolia pulled away, Eli stood frozen at the rail. Old Tom moved to stand beside him. If Clara Hargrove never left Riverton, Tom said slowly, then who was the woman we buried? Eli's mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Someone who knew about the charter. Someone they wanted silenced. And now we're the loose ends, Tom murmured. Eli made his decision in that moment. Jonas, he called. Full steam. We're not stopping until we reach Moline. Moline was a growing settlement upriver from Riverton, far enough to be beyond Hargrove's immediate reach, close enough to civilization to find help if needed. They pushed the Maybelle hard, her engine straining against the ice and current. The men worked in shifts, breaking ice ahead of the bow when necessary, keeping the boilers hot despite dwindling coal supplies. 3 days later, they docked at Moline. Eli went ashore immediately, seeking out the territorial marshal's office. The marshal, a broad-shouldered man named Davis, listened to Eli's story with growing concern. You're saying William Hargrove, one of the wealthiest men in the territory, arranged for a woman to be abandoned in a snowstorm to die? Over a document in a bridal veil? I'm saying I buried a woman who was carrying something valuable, Eli replied carefully. And now I'm being told she never existed. Marshal Davis leaned back in his chair. That's a serious accusation, Captain. What proof do you have? None, Eli admitted. Just what I saw with my own eyes. And this veil, you gave it to a minister upriver? Yes. Davis sighed. I'll send a deputy to investigate. In the meantime, I suggest you keep your head down. Hargrove has friends in high places. Eli returned to the Maybelle to find old Tom waiting with grave news. Blackwood's boat is moored downstream. He's got men asking about us in town. We need to leave, Eli said. Now. Where to? The river's freezing solid. We'll be trapped within days. Eli looked north, toward the wilderness they'd just navigated. We go back. To the settlement where we buried her. They slipped away from Moline that night, running dark, the Maybelle's engines muffled as much as possible. For 2 days, they pushed upstream, the ice growing thicker with each passing mile. Finally, the boat could go no further. The river ahead was a solid sheet of ice stretching to the horizon. We'll continue on foot, Eli told his crew. Anyone who wants to turn back can take their share of supplies and go. No one left. They gathered what they could carry and set out across the frozen river, following their previous path. The cold was brutal, the wind cutting through their layers of clothing like a knife. They reached the small settlement on the 3rd day, half-frozen and exhausted. The church stood silent against the gray sky, smoke rising from the minister's cabin nearby. The minister welcomed them in, his eyes widening at their condition. Captain Thorne, we didn't expect to see you again until spring. The veil, Eli said, his voice rough from the cold. Did you send it to Hargrove? The young man shook his head. There's been no mail courier. The snow's too deep on the roads. Relief washed over Eli. Where is it? Safe, the minister assured him. But before I give it to you, I think you should know something. He hesitated. After you left, I examined it more closely. The writing hidden in the lace, it's not just a charter. What do you mean? It's evidence. Names, dates, bribes paid to territorial officials. A record of how Hargrove and his associates have been stealing land from settlers and natives alike. With this, they could all hang for corruption. Eli sank into a chair, the implications washing over him. That's why they needed it back so desperately. And why they needed the woman who carried it silenced, the minister added grimly. Do you know who she was? I have a theory. The minister retrieved a book from his shelf, a collection of newspaper clippings. He opened it to a page showing a young woman's portrait. Sarah Collins. She was a schoolteacher in St. Louis who went missing 3 months ago. She'd been writing articles about corruption in the territorial government. Eli studied the face in the faded newspaper image. It was her, the woman they'd found frozen by the pond. She must have obtained the charter somehow, the minister continued. Was trying to get it to someone who could use it to expose them. And they sent us to find her, knowing she was already dead, Eli said bitterly. Using us to recover their evidence. That night, gathered around the minister's fire, Eli and his crew made their plan. With the river frozen, they were effectively stranded until spring, but so was anyone trying to reach them. We need to get the charter to the federal authorities in St. Louis, Eli said. Once the snow clears enough for travel. That could be months, Jonas pointed out. Then we wait months. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. The men found work around the settlement, repairing buildings, chopping wood, hunting when the weather allowed. Eli spent hours with the minister, carefully copying the information from the veil onto paper, creating duplicate records of the evidence. Winter deepened around them. The river became a highway of ice, occasionally used by trappers or natives traveling on foot or by sled. It was one such traveler who brought news from downriver. "Hargrove's men are offering a reward for information about a riverboat captain," the trapper told them over dinner one night. "Say he stole something valuable." Eli exchanged glances with old Tom. "How much of a reward?" "Enough to make a man rich," the trapper replied. "Or dead, if he's foolish enough to cross Hargrove." As January gave way to February, Eli often found himself standing at the edge of the small cemetery, looking at the simple wooden cross that marked Sarah Collins' grave. Sometimes he spoke to her, telling her about their progress, promising that her sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. "We'll make it right," he said one clear, cold afternoon. "Your story will be told." The first thaw came in early March, a few days of relative warmth that softened the snow and cracked the river ice. It was followed by another cold snap, but the pattern had been broken. Spring was coming. Eli made his decision. "Tom and I will take the evidence south," he told the others. "The rest of you stay with the Maybelle. When the river opens enough, bring her down to St. Louis." They set out 2 days later, traveling light, carrying the copied evidence and the original veil carefully wrapped in oilcloth. The going was difficult, sometimes walking on ice, sometimes trudging through knee-deep slush. They avoided settlements where they might be recognized, sleeping rough in abandoned cabins or makeshift shelters. Twice they spotted men who matched the description of Hargrove's hired guns and had to hide until the danger passed. 20 days after leaving the settlement, they reached Jefferson City, where the territorial governor maintained his offices. But Eli bypassed the capital, remembering the minister's words about officials being in Hargrove's pocket. Instead, they continued to St. Louis, arriving as April brought the first real warmth of the year. The city was a shock after months in the wilderness, crowded, noisy, full of life and commerce. They made their way to the federal courthouse, where Eli asked to speak with a judge or federal marshal. After hours of waiting, they were shown into the office of Judge Samuel Woodward, a stern-faced man with shrewd eyes. "I understand you have information about corruption in the territorial government," the judge said without preamble. Eli placed the wrapped veil on the desk between them. "This belonged to a woman named Sarah Collins. She was murdered to keep her from revealing what's written here." Judge Woodward carefully unwrapped the veil, examining the intricate lacework and the tiny writing hidden within its patterns. His expression remained impassive, but Eli noticed his hands tighten on the delicate fabric. "Do you know what you've brought me, Captain Thorne?" he asked finally. "Evidence of land theft and corruption," Eli replied. "Names, dates, amounts paid in bribes." "Yes." The judge nodded slowly. "But it's more than that. This is a record of betrayal that goes beyond the territorial government, all the way to Washington." He looked up, his eyes hard. "There are powerful men who would kill to keep this hidden." "A woman already died for it," Eli said. "Her name was Sarah Collins. She deserves justice."